Chapter 5. The Encounter. With his ever-increasing responsibilities as a weekend preacher, Lester could leave behind his cow, Marie, when he went back to Baylor for his junior year. That year he had 3 roommates who were to play important roles in his future: Joe Underwood, George Stewart, and Harold Fickett Jr. The 4 ministerial students became the best of friends. The summer between Lester's second and third years at Baylor was especially full. He was busy with work on the farm, at churches, and in revival meetings. Harold Fickett, however, decided Lester wasn't too busy to meet a friend of his. By coincidence, this friend's first name was Marie, but she wasn't 4-legged. Harold had spoken to me many times about this paragon of a roommate he had at college, but the more Harold extolled Lester's good nature, his many abilities, and his other admirable traits, the more determined I became that I didn't want to meet him. No one could be that perfect. I really wasn't interested in meeting this Lester Roloff. I must confess that one reason for my disinterest was that Lester was studying to be a preacher. I had never dated a preacher before, although I'd known a good many of them in college. I considered them to be overpious sissies who were afraid to do a day's work, and who seemed to have the idea that the world owed them a living. No thanks, I wasn't going to have any part of a preacher. Harold's father was pastor of our First Baptist Church in Galveston, Texas. During the entire summer of 1935, all I ever heard from Harold Fickett was Lester Roloff. Harold and I were working in the same department in Sunday school and training union, and we ran into each other frequently in our other church activities. I dreaded bumping into him. When Harold went back to Baylor to board with his roommate, I was glad to see him go. Lester was also building up resistance to meeting me. Harold was annoyingly persistent. Finally, Harold found the perfect solution. He discovered that both of us were planning to attend the state training union convention held each year during the Thanksgiving holidays. That year, the meeting was to be held at First Baptist Church in Dallas. Harold dared Lester to write me a letter asking me to meet him there. Of course, Lester was the type who couldn't say no to that kind of a dare. The letter that arrived from Lester strangely intrigued me. I talked it over with my parents. Should I agree to meet Harold's roommate at the convention in Dallas? I responded to Lester saying that I'd be glad to meet him. Then he wrote a second time telling me what time to meet him at the entrance to the church. As far as I can remember, this is the first and only time I ever arrived at a meeting 30 minutes early. I did that so I could look him over. If I liked what I saw, I would carry out the plan. If not, I would fade into the crowd and stand him up. He was of average height and neatly attired in a navy blue suit with vest, navy tie, and white shirt. He wore a hat and glasses. Since it was November and rather brisk wind was blowing, he carried an overcoat over his arm. I wasn't sure this fine-looking, blonde-haired young man was the fellow I was to meet, but I couldn't help hoping that it was. I had heard his name so many times that I had become tired of it, but now that I was about to meet him, I wasn't even sure I could pronounce it correctly. I decided to give it a try. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door of the church and approached him. "Excuse me, but are you waiting for someone?" He looked at me and smiled and answered, "Why, yes, I am. Are you Marie Brady?" From that point on, we attended all the sessions of the convention together. Lester felt he needed to sit with his church people, and that's what we did. I thought to myself that if I didn't enjoy being with him, it would be easy to bow out gracefully. As the morning progressed, however, I found myself enjoying every minute of sitting next to him. When noontime came, Lester had made arrangements for the church members to go one way, and he and I went another. This was going to be our time together to talk and get acquainted. We went to the Mayflower Hotel, and Lester ordered a beautiful Thanksgiving dinner for us. We slowly walked back to the afternoon session, but I must admit I heard very little of those messages. On Saturday, the final day of the convention, we were both conscious that we had precious few moments left to spend together. Lester left with his church members before my train pulled out for Galveston. I must have touched my cheek 100 times where he kissed me when we parted. Already, I missed him, so I sat down and wrote him a letter. When Lester arrived in Waco on Monday, he had a 10-page letter waiting for him. Thus began our correspondence, with letters going back and forth once a week, then twice a week, then 3 times weekly, and finally, one every day. Then came Christmas. Lester decided to accompany Harold home to Galveston for the holidays. This time, neither of us had to be coaxed to see each other. Of course, Harold reminded us often that he had a part in our meeting each other. My husband is fond of telling that when we first met, I told him I would never marry a preacher. He had replied that he didn't mind, for his plans didn't include a wife in the near future. But now those plans suddenly changed. During the holidays, he asked me to marry him. I wasn't too surprised and quickly answered yes. Lester was an old-fashioned young man. He went to my parents to receive their permission to marry me. That same Sunday, Lester brought the evening message at our church and sang. It was the first time I had heard him preach or sing in Christmas of 1935. In February, at our church's annual Sweetheart Banquet, our engagement announcement was made. It came in the form of a telegram delivered during the course of the evening's events. The wedding took place August 10th, 1936, with Harold Fickett's father performing the ceremony. Lester and I were opposites in backgrounds and natures. I was an only child and a city girl. He used to say I did not know a cow from a horse or a chicken from a pig. But our mutual love for the Lord and for each other was deep and real. He was still half-time pastor of 2 churches, Purdon and Navarro Mills. I often teased him that I was marrying him for his money. At that time, he was receiving a total salary of $50 a month. During that summer preceding our wedding, Lester conducted revival meetings in many small Texas towns. I should have realized then, but I did not, that my husband was destined to be an evangelist. One little town after another was turned upside down by the preaching of this fiery Baylor student. These were wicked little towns where the gambling halls and liquor stores did a thriving business. In Purdon, it was estimated that more than 100 people were born again. The gambling hall closed, and the bootlegger went out of business. Now it was necessary for the church to get a full-time pastor, and Navarro Mills had to find some other part-time pastor.